Hello, everyone. Welcome to Filmography. To all the 20 of you who are watching this I'm Shubhadeep. We have Arup and Tampi with us. Arup and Tampi, say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. And today we have Trevor Trehan with us, who is the editor and owner of KoreanScreen.com, which a website which gives regular doses of substantial content on Korean cinema. Recently, he and his team did a poll on his website to identify a list of 100 best Korean films ever, taking opinion of 158 film critics from 28 countries around the world. So do check out that list to know which are the top 10. Hello, Trevor. Welcome to Filmcopath. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much. Trevor, so you live in the UK, right?
Yes, Oxford. Yeah.
So yeah, what's with this affinity with Korean cinema? Where did this love affair start, and how is it going?
Yeah, I think my starting point was similar to a lot of people, and it was OldBoy. To be honest with you, I watched that not long after it had come out, and it just blew my mind. Really, the film in itself, but the approach and the way that it was stylized. And from there, I just started watching more and more Korean films. There was this DVD range called the Tartan Asian Extreme range, and they got rights for sort of various Asian films around that time. And I started working my way through that. And at that point, having watched mainly Western and European cinema, starting to watch Korean cinema was like a breath of fresh air. It was almost like finding films again, discovering cinema all over again. So I sort of started with OldBoy and the Vengeance trilogy, and then, just went from there, and have sort of stayed with it since around, when OldBoy came out in 2003. And it's continued to maintain that sort of visceral appeal to me, Korean cinema. I really think that the stuff that comes out of Korea is unique to Korea, is not something that you see in many other cinemas around the world.
Mm-hmm. Just to follow up on that, so since you have been watching a lot of Korean cinema, and also you are aware with European and American cinema, what do you think are the major differences which you observe when you see a Korean film and you compare it to some other industries around the world?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that here in the UK, in the US, and in some European markets, they're very obsessed with genre films, as in making a film that's a certain genre. So and it's going to scare you, and that's what's going to happen. Or I'm going to make a romance film or a drama film. We almost like to keep on these sort of rail tracks of what genres are. What's always blown my mind about Korean cinema, and Bong Joon-ho is very famous for this, but Korean cinema has been doing this for decades. It's just blending genres, having a comedy that slips into a drama that goes to a thriller and ends up at a horror. The fact that it just takes you out of that comfort zone of thinking you know what's going to happen, but the genres are all pulled, left, right, and center. I think personally, this was a point that was made by a film journalist at The Guardian in the UK once, saying that one of the good things about Korean crime films, which I particularly love, you watch a lot of US crime films and they solve their problems with a gun, which is actually quite a boring way to solve a problem because you just point it at someone and shoot, right? But they don't really have that incredibly strict gun laws in Korea. So it ends up being this far more confronting, knife-based fights and violence and stuff like that just makes for much better cinema. I mean, in particular, there's a crime film called New World, and there's a scene in that where they're trapped in an elevator fighting with knives. That's really difficult to watch because you can almost imagine yourself being trapped in there with these sort of knives flying at you, which isn't something that happens in lots of other cinema, particularly in the US, where there's guns that seem to cut some of that drama short. So it's those elements. And the final one I would say in Korean cinema, and this sounds a little strange, is that they don't always have the sort of they don't have the huge Hollywood budgets some of the top directors will have now, but they find ways to do things in a more real sense. I'll give you an example from The Host, the Bong Joon-ho 2006 film, The Host. and a lot of it's shot in a sewer underneath Seoul. And if you watch the making of that, they would say in Hollywood, they would just build a set. They would build something like a shallow pool that looked like a sewer, and they would shoot it there. They didn't have the money to do that. So that's actually shot in the sewer in Seoul, in sewer water that the actors were rolling around in. So you end up getting sometimes it's almost an advantage to not have a budget. You end up getting a much realer piece of filmmaking because they've had to just go to the sewer and do it. So all of those elements come together that I think really sets out from pretty much any other country in the world.
You talked about the mixing of the genres, and you talked about OldBoy, of course, and that I don't think there can be a better introduction to the filmmaker we're going to talk about today. Of course, Park Chan-wook, probably one of the most celebrated filmmakers of South Korea, specifically for the horror genre. And because in those horror movies, he shows alarming depths of human nature. And that's why maybe he can simultaneously be celebrated on fanboy horror websites and win the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Park is best known for his Vengeance trilogy. Of course, there are so many other films, but he's best known for this: Mr. Vengeance, Oldboy, and Lady Vengeance. Park won the Grand Prix at the 2004 Cannes Film Festival for Oldboy. And in 2009, Park won the Prix du Jury Award for Thirst. So that's a little bit of intro about Park Chan-wook. I want to ask you, and then Trevor, you first, and then I'll open to the rest of the group. So we see that in your list on KoreanScreen.com, top 10 modern Korean directors, you have kept Park Chan-wook at #1. So why have you done that, and what is the standout aspect for you of Park Chan-wook? There's so many other directors, Chang Dong-lee is there, of course, Bong Joon-ho is so much famous around the world right now. What really establishes him as your #1 of modern filmmakers in Korea?
And I think the reason he got #1 in the end, I think if he'd just done the Vengeance trilogy, he wouldn't have been #1. If he'd just done sort of, The Handmaiden and similar, he wouldn't be #1. But it's the fact that the same director managed to do this, ultra-violent revenge thriller, and then do something like The Handmaiden, which is like a period piece, still with flashes of violence, but it's also this very lush, piece of filmmaking. He's got this incredible range, and he's also got a great horror, even though it's a sort of horror thriller in Thirst as well. So I think that when filmmakers show that sort of versatility, I think it puts them on another level to, directors that have found a way of doing a certain thing and just keep doing it. Just before Handmaiden came out in 2016, he's one of those directors where you felt he's probably made his best film in OldBoy, or, Lady Vengeance, I don't think is far behind OldBoy. And then to do something like Handmaiden, which is, really, considered one of the top 5 Korean films ever in the wake of having done the Vengeance trilogy. I just think you put all those films together, going all the way back to Joint Security era as well in 2000, where it is another type of film as well, because it's another thriller, but it's a sort of military mystery thriller, and it's also sort of like a buddy movie. It's about this connection between these guys. Yeah. I think to have that range, to be able to do that much stuff, I don't know. There's not another director in Korea at the moment, that can do that.
Let me come to Arup. Arup, what do you think? What is the standout aspect of director Park Chan-wook?
Yeah, so that point that Trevor mentioned about the rawness or the rootedness of Korean cinema, if I consider that to be a standout point, Park Chan is that director who will take that rawness to the extreme level. So it's like, listening to music at the highest volume or driving a car at the highest speed. So you might see, there's a lot of scenes in his films which is front facing, where the character is in the middle, and it feels like, he will take it as it goes, up front. There is no inhibition, nothing, as it actually happens, or it might be, more than it actually happens, facing it, head on. That kind of an effect that I get from his films is incredible. it kind of it takes you to the world of those characters. You feel that you are in a roller coaster ride while this film is going on. An incredible experience, and not only a story, it's an experience that I feel from his films. So that stands for me. That that highest volume and highest speed that this director takes me to.
Right. Arnab, what about you?
Yeah, I kind of take the pointers from what both of you said. Only Trevor, when he said like different kind of genres, yes, indeed. Like we didn't mention about I Am Cyborg, but it's okay. It's totally different from Vengeance series, and someone who has made the Vengeance series, we don't expect to see that, and that's a great thing in a filmography, which usually doesn't have with few of the most celebrated directors in the West. They keep on doing a similar type of genre, and when they try to do something different, that doesn't work as great as what they do are best at. So that's one part. And the second part, the rawness. We're talking about rawness since we are from India. When we see Indian film that talks about reality, that goes into those shots which doesn't have much of color, because that's how the real life is and all. But if you see Chan-wook's films, even it's raw, it's real. All the frame, the set pieces, especially if you go into the Vengeance, Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance, the use of color, it's so poetic. Even though it's raw, it's real, it's so poetic, and often the scene transitions into surreal moments, and that's something I really liked. All the three movies, like and how they play with the human emotion, and obviously revenge is the most fulfilling human emotion. Agree or not? So how they've used that revenge within a raw setting, and sometimes using that to go into a surreal moment. Well, if you see in the OldBoy, it's the ant is crawling on the skin. It's not real. It's like it's the revenge in him. It's like makes him hallucinate all this. Then in Lady Vengeance, you'll see that the transition into a dream sequence, which is very light. There is so much light from the dark space where Guamja is sleeping, and they transition into this what would I say, sledge-like thing, where the face of the man who she wants to kill is there inside the dog's skin, and she is shooting that. Like all this transition from real to surreal, and again keeping it doesn't look distracting. That's something which is great about Chan-wook films.
I would just add, like, if you ask anybody in India that have you seen any Korean movie, then the only movie we have seen is OldBoy. Right? It's such a phenomenon that you won't find anybody watching anything else Korean cinema. Nobody has heard of The Burning or the other Vengeance trilogy, other two movies of the Vengeance trilogy, but everybody knows about OldBoy. So that is the kind of effect a Park Chan-wook had on Indian youth, who actually it opened up this entire Pandora's box to the Indian viewer. And the other thing is, it works without the subtext. So all of Park Chan-wook's movies have deep philosophies and moral conundrums and a lot of subtext which you can analyze, which you can think about. There are people who write theses. I read a thesis from University of Ohio. He was doing a subtext analysis of the Vengeance trilogy. However, even without the subtext, you get to enjoy the movies. You actually appreciate, and that is what really enamors me about Park Chan-wook. That when I watched OldBoy, I was like 10 years younger, and I didn't understand the moral philosophies or whatever he is trying to talk about. But it gave me so much of happiness at that age, which I do not think I find in a lot of directors, either from what I have seen all around me. That is something. Trevor, coming back to you, and we have mentioned OldBoy a couple of times, and of course, I think we would all have to agree that of all the films, OldBoy is the one which has had the most impact on us, and probably the first movie of Korean cinema which we might have watched. So for you, let's talk about OldBoy a little bit. What is so special about OldBoy for you? And of course, I'll come back to the others later.
Yeah, I think it has a great setup to begin with. I think it has a really original setup, and I think whenever you make a revenge film, as an audience member, you have to be invested in that revenge, and you feel this outrage of him being imprisoned and not knowing. Like, you imagine what it would be like for you, how angry you would be. So when he starts to, get his revenge, you're on board. There's no grey area. You're with him, even when he sometimes acts in a way that isn't acceptable in itself. So I love that element of it. And also I just think that not to give anything away for people who haven't seen it, but they'll at least know that there's a big twist in it, and that twist just really just stays with you. I remember your head is almost swimming for a week after that twist. You just can't believe, like you were saying, it's those depths that humans can go in how they treat each other. We don't really see it, and certainly not to that extent in any other species or animal, the way that we are so creatively cruel to each other. And that idea that he come up with to punish him is using human creativity, to punish this person. So that, I've always wanted to somehow find a way of forgetting that twist and getting to watch that film for the first time, because I can just remember it so clearly of, where I was and what sofa I was and what house I was living in. And lots of films have had great twists, but I don't think anything, can compare to that. And you sort of mentioned the moral element and this idea of, we often think that sort of getting our revenge will make everything okay, when actually you just end up putting yourself in some sort of cycle that you never really get out of. And they do that in OldBoy, and then he particularly touches that on Lady Vengeance, where she's trying to get her revenge, but she knows that she'll never be whole again. Like, she's doing it because she thinks that, I have to get my revenge, I have to settle the score. But she's so broken by the end. She's such a shell of a person. And it's the similar sort of thing in OldBoy. And it's this cautionary tale in life. I mean, these are extreme examples that revenge is almost hardwired into us. I mean, it was probably something, if you speak to someone who knows about these types of things, but evolutionary theory, it was probably an advantage for our species at some point to be vengeful. So if someone stole from our tribe or something, we got them back, we probably had a better chance of survival, so on and so forth. So revenge is hardwired into us, but it's not actually that rational a thing to do. In fact, we often end up harming ourselves more trying to get vengeance on things when we should just let things go. So it's a really profound film about human nature. And something else I like about it, people talk about it being ultra violent, and it is. It is a very, very violent film. But what's interesting about it is that he actually, lots of the violence you don't see. He shoots it in such a way that you feel like it's there. One example is when he goes back to the person who runs a private prison, and he tortures him with a hammer to take out his teeth. Right? Don't actually see that. He shoots to like the hammer on the teeth, and then he goes to sort of point of view shot where he's above you moving the hammer. And I can feel it on my teeth now just describing it. And then you see the teeth on the side. You don't actually see the act. It's just such good filmmaking that you join the dots, and we make it even worse when we join our own dots. There's a story at the end of OldBoy. There is, not giving too much away, there is a tongue cutting scene in OldBoy. And when they go to shoot it, the way they do scripts is the production designers will read the script and go and make stuff they think they need. And they went to Park Chan-wook at the end, and they'd made a fake tongue, like a bloody tongue, and gave it to him. And he's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want to show like a severed tongue. I'm going to shoot it in such a way so that happens, but it's not so obvious, because if you make it so obvious, you kind of come out of the moment. You realize it's a film because it's, you can see a prop. So instead, he makes the violence so sort of gut churning by letting you join the dots, letting you fill in the details on it. And that's why he's such a good filmmaker, because lots of people would have been tempted to throw in that sort of weird fake tongue, but he didn't. We know it happens, and he just does it through good filmmaking.
Let's come to Arup. Arup, what is, just to add on what Trevor said, Trevor brought really two very interesting points. One about the filmmaking capability of Trevor, Park, where he uses the angles and the way we join the dots in our head. And also one very interesting evolutionary aspect where revenge was probably necessary in the past, and now it is no more. And bringing all these things in a movie talks about a lot about the kind of thought process would probably Park goes through when he makes something like an Old Boy. So, what interests you in Old Boy? Why do you like it, Arup?
So there's so much. I mean, Old Boy, or for that matter, any of Park film is like on a random, kind of pause your screen, you will have a beautiful image. That image is such a rich composition that, that itself gives you a value. And Old Boy is, like a kind of, one after the other things like that come. So, it's like if you mute the film and you just watch, you are not following the storyline, or you might be doing it in the second instance. You will just see how beautifully the compositions are done. And a same image or a same sequence where a very gory, the tongue severing one, Trevor was mentioning, or the tooth picking one, or all of that. And now you kind of switch off the monitor, or you switch off your TV and just hear the music. It's a classical music going on in the back end. So just think about them coming together. This bringing together of the extreme violence with the classical music, and they coming together and binding aesthetically. To even think about it is unbelievable. And then this man has actually implemented it. So that's astounding for me. And another thing, I think, we were mentioning that how much Old Boy has been an impacting film for us. But if we have watched one Korean film, that might be Old Boy. And I think that's the film which actually brought Korean cinema to the world platform. I mean, US and the whole of the world, they kind of got a newly evolved attention towards Korean cinema when Old Boy came. They were like, what has this country or this filmmaker done? I mean, how come they come with this kind of a concept and this kind of filmmaking? And that is, the ripping, maybe Bong Joon-ho eventually is doing, with Parasite, and the kind of attention, the kind of, hype, and of course, most desirably and most deservingly, but the kind of attention that Korean cinema is getting today, I think it goes back to Old Boy and its ovation and all of the things, the way it was received in Cannes and beyond that. So those are things, for me, Old Boy is so important.
Yeah, Arnab, I was coming to you. What is your point of view? Why do you think this Old Boy is such a classic, and what kind of impact did it have on you as a person?
This is interesting because Trevor has already mentioned about some part of the subtext, and also how that human need for revenge and how cruel it can go, which is explored in Old Boy, and also the filmmaking. Arup has explained about different set pieces, the frames, and the beauty of filmmaking. Okay, let me come to another side as an audience who when I watched Old Boy in 2006 or sometime, that I was in my college, and I was not at that time I didn't watch much of Korean cinema, not much. I haven't watched any Korean cinema, so my idea was more about the different Indian films I've watched, and I have never seen something like that. So when I was watching as a fanboy, it astounded me seeing those action sequences, and obviously that elaborate corridor action scene. That reminded me also that time, if you remember, that we had the computer desktop, and there were few video games, some arcade games like Final Fight, Double Dragon, those ones, which like where if you take a sit back, you'll see that a person is actually going and just brutally killing all the henchmen that is coming on our way. That whole sequence gave him the same impact as if I am playing the video game, even though Park Chan-wook later in an interview said that was unintentional, but that gave that impression. And probably that's the reason many people from India and many other part of the globe actually love the movie without getting into the subtext, because that is something a majority of the youth has grown playing those video games, those arcade games. So that was where the whole sequence that totally glued me to the film. And later, like all the parts which Arup and Trevor has explained, that I could imbibe that feeling. But that was the first impression, and I thought like I should be sharing it. And which has interestingly nothing to do with the filmmaking. I mean, no, but not the artistic part of the filmmaking or anything subtext. It's how the audience had felt. and how Old Boy has become what it is today.
I think that corridor scene is kind of the whole film in a short sequence where this man is facing one after the other challenge. He's dropping down. He's getting, he's getting a knife at his back, and then he's rising up again
Yeah.
fighting. I mean, he's still continuation. This kind of the survival instinct that whole sequence shows is in a way, a theme of Old Boy itself.
Yeah, no, also, yeah, it's like at some point it can be hyperbolic. This person is killing all of them, but then again, like which Aurup said, he's getting stabbed, he's falling down, and again coming up. So it's not like those, like prior to that we have seen this kind of sequence that hero doesn't get hurt at all. He's flying and kicking and all this stuff. So this was so real and raw. The raw, I think it's like the young blood and within us. I was in my early 20s then. I was like, okay, I have to get into this kind of fist fight. Obviously I will not suggest that. And will not want that now, but yeah,
I feel that by the end of that corridor fight scene, you feel exhausted, like as a viewer. You yourself feel an exhaustion after that scene is over, as if you were a part of that, the way it has been shot. Moving on, I would like to just of course we can start with Trevor again. We can, if we keep Old Boy aside, what is your favorite film of the Park universe, and why do you like it the most?
I would probably. I just think The Handmaiden is just a remarkable film. I mean, he keeps that element of sort of twisting and turning. Again, it's also a love story, like a romance at the heart of it as well. I think going back to Japanese occupation as well, he managed to bring in some really sort of interesting cinematography and costumes and what have you. Such a big departure from everything he's done before that it really is just an incredibly lush film, and manages to be really surprising. And you're making the point earlier about how everything is turned up to 10, and that's the same with The Handmaiden as well, including scenes involving their relationship. Sometimes people would go, was that necessary? And it's like, well, it's a Park Chan-wook film. Like everything is going to be at the extreme. You can't be upset that that's what he's ended up doing. And I'd have another mention as well I don't, except for his two early films, I don't think he's made a bad film since he became established. And I just think Joint Security Area is such an incredible film. I mean, there's a story with Park Chan-wook. He made those two films. He was trying to make a living as a film critic as well, because he just couldn't make money from making these films. And one producer completely just dismissed him, said, I think the exact quote was, I'll eat my hat if Park Chan-wook makes a commercially successful film. Just thought that, this guy's too strange. He doesn't get it. And then he made Joint Security Area in 2000, which was at the time the highest grossing Korean film ever. And I just love that story of people telling you can't do something and then you managing to do the exact opposite. And it's a film that really holds up today. There's a good reissue of it recently from Arrow Video, and it's still a great film. And that's another thing to go back on the earlier point about what makes Korean cinema so interesting. They've had a really interesting history, large amount of Japanese occupation. They had like a military dictatorship for nearly 20 years, so they've had all sorts of interesting history. And also it's a country split in half between two ideologies. Right. So there's loads of really interesting stories between the North and the South. There's a Kim Ki-duk film that I really like called The Net, which is about a North Korean that sort of floats into South Korean waters. And it's so fascinating because he's treated as a refugee, but that's not a refugee in the sense that we understand that word, as in they speak the same language, they look the same. There's this almost arbitrary ideology border in between them. And Joint Security Area does a really good job. If you watch classic South Korean cinema, if there's ever a character from the North, they're brainwashed idiot. Really, that they're not portrayed very nicely. And Song Kang-ho, who obviously did The Host and Parasite and is probably the most sort of famous Korean actor, he played someone from the North, and he played them like a human. He played them like another person that just happens to be this side of the ideology. So it's quite an important film in making people in the South and globally realize that not everyone in North Korea is some sort of, drone, just people that happen to be in that country. And it's also just a great film, just really surprising and interesting. So yeah, I think Joint Security Area and The Handmaiden, I think are probably the sort of two off the rank after OldBoy.
Right. What about you, Arnav? What is your favorite Park Chan-wook movie other than OldBoy?
Yeah, no, it's a little difficult to pick up, but like I would say that I'll go with Lady Vengeance maybe. I don't know, for some reason I like it little more than OldBoy at this juncture of life. Even though the Lady Vengeance, if you see, unlike the other two films in the Vengeance series, here the antagonist is completely evil, and we know. And even the main protagonist and everyone, she also knows about it, and the whole movie is how she takes revenge. Apparently, on pen and paper, it looks like a very simple film, but how it's the execution, the non-linear way. At the same time, the use of music, editing, cinematography, everything makes it and the acting makes it a complete wholesome film, and it's sure like the whole department comes together to work on it. I'll give one example. Like when we talk about match cuts in films, this has probably one of the best transition scenes which I have seen. Like if you see the whole climax, the long 30 minutes climax sequence where, and here, okay, there are some spoilers now. So the whole all the families are there sitting there waiting for the revenge, and before that they had been shown in the tape about how the guy actually was torturing their child and all. If you see the transition where the little girl was about to be hanged, and then Mr. Bark, what was the character's name, Mr. Berk or Bark? Yeah. Anyway, that he was kicking the chair, and then the next shot was a chair was falling down. The granny of that girl falls down and was doing like that. The transition was so smooth, and even the similar kind of transition we see when each of the person were going and torturing that killer, and then immediately it cuts into the reaction of this the whole lot of the family members sitting in the bench who are eager to go. So not only this, so throughout the movie the editing is fabulous, and then the music, it feels like a odyssey. Even if like Balu was talking about that violin scene in the classical music in OldBoy, probably that Park Chan-wook used as a reference point throughout the whole film of Lady Vengeance and use it throughout. That's another reason I liked. And obviously the background, the use of color, the surreal moment, the transitioning from real to surreal, and the last the climax, which talks about the futility of revenge. Even though the revenge happened, there is no redemption. And I really enjoyed that film where after all the families have killed that guy, they're celebrated, they're going out. The lady sees the grown version of that young child's ghost sitting there, and she's trying to ask for forgiveness, and he actually grabs her by neck, and then she goes, and then like the whole only redemption was like her daughter was alive. She kinds of you give this tofu symbolizes, okay, be as pure as tofu and all, and that pure white, the snow is falling, that long shot, but you can see that this lady is crying, and if you see her face, there is not that ultimate contentment which we usually associate with revenge drama from West or India. There is that pain, there is somewhere, I mean, that's somewhere, that loneliness, that blank, and that is where the movie ends. And it's brilliant. While I'm talking, I'm getting goosebumps. Like that's like, but no one talks about Lady Vengeance like they do in OldBoy. Maybe it's like OldBoy has those set pieces, action sequences which are more appealing for whatever reasons. But yeah, the Lady Vengeance will be for mine. And JSA, for another reason, like JSA is so relevant in today's time.
What stands out for me in Lady Vengeance is in sympathy for Mr. Vengeance or Old Boy. It's a revenge story of a individual or more than one individual. In Lady Vengeance, they transfer it to a group, and it kind of feels like a vengeance by humanity. The way things happen to dictators, way a war happens. That group feeling, it was a very unique thing in a vengeance story. How do you feel about Lady Vengeance, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it might just be a hair's breadth behind Old Boy. I've had times where I've been watching Lady Vengeance and thought, do you know what? I think this might be better than Old Boy. I think that he really has got into his stride by the time he gets to that third film. He really knows, what he's doing with those themes. So yeah, if anyone came along and said what you just said, that I think Lady Vengeance is better, I wouldn't argue with that. It's that close. It'll be interesting. We're at Creative Screen. We're about to launch the sort of public vote version of that list that you just mentioned. So we're going to set up a survey and just send it around the world. And it'll be interesting to see how well Lady Vengeance does. There will definitely be a large amount of people that I think will put it above Old Boy. In some ways, it's more stylish and slick. So some of the use of that use of snow, near the end as well, really gets me. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Of course, and when we talk about Lady Vengeance, once again, the way it is set up, and when we get to see the backstory of all the characters whom she had helped in the prison, and when all of that comes together, and when the director plays the sequence again, and when she's going for finally going for the revenge, it really gets you along the journey. Like you feel yourself that, okay, I want this vengeance in my life. That's what Park does to you. Like you get so involved with whatever he's doing. We have discussed so many films, Arup, but I think we need to talk about Thirst. Right? We cannot have a Park Chan-wook movie discussion without Thirst. So Arup, let me start with you. What are your views on Thirst? Possibly one of the very best movies what I have seen.
Thirst is that definition, Trevor was speaking about previously, that the Korean filmmakers blend genres. So that is one film. It's a vampire story. It has as beautiful comic set pieces like you will get in any other film. And it's also a romance, and it's also a tragedy. I mean, Thirst, that sense of guilt, that sense of pleasure seen, the way it is portrayed, I mean, unbelievable. I cannot believe, there are scenes which stayed with me for, months maybe after I had watched Thirst. Think about that premise. This guy, the father, he starts with, how can I save human beings? And it converts into which are the people is, the right, he's finding for right reasons to kill some human beings. That's the kind of arc this guy goes through, and that kind of establishes the fact of how pleasure, guilt, sin, they suck you in and make you a different human being. Just think about that one scene. I cannot get over that scene where again Kang So, he's having sex with this lady, and that guy they killed is in between them. He's laughing at us at the camera. I mean, I just cannot believe how a person is conceptualizing this scene and how beautifully it does not talk about their guilt, but that comes to us and gets us realized, every time they're spending, they are having that guilt in their mind. So there are so many such sequences in this film, and it's one of my favorite Korean movies. For that matter, one of my favorite movies ever, Thirst.
When we talk about Thirst, and Trevor, I want to ask you about this. We see a lot of fluids, and there's this sound. A lot of people have talked about so much sound of sucking the blood and then killing and making them alive, and this visceral violence. In general, in Park Chan cinema, we see violence, quite an overdose of it, we could say. In Thirst and in general, what do you feel about the violence in Thirst overall, the mental as well as the portrayal in the form of sound and blood, and of course the multiple visceral scenes which we see?
Yeah, I think generally sound plays, well, sound plays a big part in cinema in general. I mean, it's 50% of a film, I think was what George Lucas said. It's, you know, a very important part of it. And it's always been an important part of Park Chan-wook's film. And like you say, that there's a lot of, you know, real, you know, bloody scenes. It's a different type of violence. I mean, I think that scene where he's sort of laying down, sucking on the tube of blood. And it's made even more interesting because it's a comment on religion as well. And Korea has a sort of an interesting, you know, combination of religions. And, you know, to have this, you know, devout Catholic being forced to do these types of acts and then seeing all of that sort of world slip through his fingers when he has to not only do that, but then start, you know, pursuing his friend's, you know, partner as well, makes it such a powerful film because he's throwing so many issues at you. It's about religion, it's about lust, it's about consequence as well, how our actions carry these consequences. And again, to sort of mention him again, I think it's one of Song Kang-ho's best performances as well. He's just so perfectly pitched, you know, to do that role because he's such a likable actor, such a relatable actor when he's on screen, and he's put in this sort of kind of impossible situation, yet we go with him on it. You know, it's a situation that's never going to happen to any of us. Like, don't worry. It's never going to be a problem at any point. Yet you're so invested in what's happening and what he's going to do and what he sort of does with this, you know, sidekick partner that comes to be. And the vampire film has been done so many times, you know, as well. I mean, it's that classic story, isn't it? That it, like you say, it is a vampire movie, it is a horror film, but it's also a romantic thriller at the same time. It's all of these three things at the same time. So, yeah, I'm so pleased that he went in that direction. It's not a surprise for someone that's done violence to the extent that he has to go and do a horror, if you could call it that. And I think you kind of can. I think it's close enough to a horror, but it's a lot of other things at the same time. And back to my earlier point, it just strengthens the case for why he's such a great filmmaker, because he's able to bounce around these stories and these genres and look like that's the genre he directs in.
I think since you mentioned Song Kang-ho, I think for Thirst, I need to mention Kim Ok-ben, like the actress. I think in some sequences, and you tell me your thoughts, Trevor and Arnav, in some sequences, actually, somehow I feel that she surpasses Song, the way she looks, and when she gets her independence as a vampire and she's running away all the places, to all different places and killing people for fun. Like that is what Song doesn't like. He wants to do it. He still wants some moral aspects to it, but the monstrosity of the actor of Kim, who plays the character of his love interest. It's amazing the way she pulls off that role. She's a new actor, newcomer, and whatever she does in her presence, you're really sucked into it. What do you think about that? About her performance at first?
Yeah, that ties into a little story about when I sort of looked into the making of Thirst. One thing that he does when he makes a film is that he tries to. This is Park Chan-wook. He tries to create like a bit of a siege mentality between the actors. So if you get cast in a Park film, you can expect a lot of drinking together before you start shooting. They all go out for like soju and they all spend their time together. And he makes them kind of like a family. You know, this is not actors just turning up and doing their stuff. He'll make them spend time together and making sure that there's sort of a respect between each other. And then I think you see that on the film. I think you see that they're people that are enjoying working with each other and have really got each other and sort of respect what they're doing. So she was cast, and then I can only imagine how she is feeling. She's like, right, I've got to do a Park Chan-wook film with Song Kang-ho. I really can't stuff this up because no one's ever going to give me anything ever again. But I think she was so close to them by the time they started filming, and she sort of trusted them so much that, yeah, you're completely right. I mean, it's quite often with Song Kang-ho, sometimes he's so good that it makes like the other actors look bad. And there's a short actually that he's in it, and it doesn't work because he's so good. And the person he's opposite, who wasn't actually a professional actor, just isn't really there, and then you're taken out at the moment because you know it's a short, it's not a real thing. But yeah, she completely holds her own, and she has to as well, because if that chemistry between the two of them doesn't work, then the film doesn't work.
Right. Right.
To that point, Shubhadeep, I remember this last sequence where she is not okay to give it up. She still wants to continue that way, and Kang has decided that this is over for them. They should not be there around killing more people. The way she is, trying to first she tries to put this, get into the car and then get under the car, and one after the other, Kang is, getting those options out for her. That helplessness, and yet trying to do something more to get still living.
Yeah.
She did fantastic. She was so good that way.
Absolutely. I think we can talk about some of our favorite scenes now. When we talk about Park Chan-wook, then talking about favorite scenes is possibly the lamest thing to do, because as Arup mentioned, because if you could stop a scene of any cinema anywhere, it is a sequence which you would like. And but still, I think we could discuss some of our favorite scenes. So maybe we can start with Arnab, why don't you start? Tell us your favorite scenes, maybe one scene. We'll do one scene each. Okay, so let's start.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. There are so many of them, but about. So obviously, I mean, one scene in JSA where the actual, that not exactly confrontation scene, where the other North Korean soldier finds out that 4 of them in the room and each of them are pointing the gun, and then the unfortunate incidents happen. So the whole sequence is like that tickling bomb kind of thing. It gave me the feeling that okay, I know something will happen, but when and how it will burst out, and the way it transpires was totally something I was not expecting. Whole sequence was like, it's a brilliant writing, brilliant conceptualizing, and also keeping the audience interested and invested. What will happen next? So that scene, it's something which has thrill in it. At the same time, it's heart melting, and talks a lot about the politics and everything. At the same time, it's so well choreographed. I really like that scene, and the way they use the shot of the eyes only, which again is used in a small twist in the climax, but like I will not reveal that for people who haven't seen it. Yeah, that particular scene I just recollected.
Coming to you, Trevor. Yeah, if you could name one scene, had to pick one scene for your life of Park Chan-wook, what would that be?
Do you know? I think I'm going to put obviously, you think about the octopus scene and the corridor scene. I think one of my favourites, the one that as soon as you said that, I think about a cyborg film, the sort of romantic comedy. And what I really like, there's an amazing scene in I'm a Cyborg, but that's okay, where she thinks that she's a cyborg, and then we see her acting as a cyborg with her fingers turning into guns, firing bullets, going through the hospital and just shooting up the entire hospital. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's classically surprising because we assume that her view of being a cyborg is purely in her head, and then all of a sudden you see her walking through, killing everyone, and it's just really, really brilliantly done with her walking down the halls of the hospitals and blowing up, and then going outside, and he does this quite long shot which is set really high up, looking down on the gardens of the hospital, where she's just shooting all of the doctors and what have you, and her love interest is up on the balcony. I just love it because it's just so mad. Like it really is from the mind of a filmmaker that is doing stuff most of us can't understand. So I think even though I think that's a great film, even though it's not mentioned in the same breath as the rest of them, I think that is the scene that comes to my mind first when I think about him.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Arup? Choose one scene.
One I mentioned, that scene, that sex scene with this guy they killed in between. That's a beautiful one. There's another scene. I was watching OldBoy recently, just to kind of revisit it and for this discussion. Now, see, I know what's the twist and I know everything. There is this one scene where this exposition is happening, he looks into this album and he now knows what he has been into, what he has been dragged into. And you remember there was this scene when Odesu is first introduced. He's in the police station and he has got few wings.
Yes.
He's bringing that for the birthday of his daughter.
Yeah.
And he was just, kind of joking around with that wings. That time, Park has already got us, exhausted by that exposition. Now we are done as an audience. If you are watching OldBoy for the first time, you are done by that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he puts this scene where where his love interest now has put that wings and she just flutters twice like this. That is the point where, if you are a very sensitive person, the tears drop from your eyes. That's that breaking point of you as an audience. That, I have watched maybe 10 times OldBoy, and then again when I watched that scene only 2 days back, I still had goosebumps. I know everything and I still had goosebumps. So that scene is such a beautiful scene. It's for 2 seconds maybe. There's only a few seconds I have that scene, but it has that kind of an impact on you.
Right.
With that scene with the police, he's in the police station, isn't he? He's been brought in. That was the last scene they shot in the film, and if you notice, he's much heavier in that scene.
Yes.
And they shot it last, and they'd done everything else because once he'd been in prison, just eating those dumplings for several years, he's much leaner. But they sent him away, and he got bigger. He put on loads of weight. And I love that attention to detail, that going, you could easily just shoot that how he looks, right? No, he's slightly heavier. Mm-hmm. So you're going to go away and put on X amount of pounds or stone.
Yeah. Almost a different person, actually. He looks like almost a different person in that scene.
Yeah, but it's that attention to detail. It's not letting anything go. It's, it's got to be completely right. OldBoy shot way over, like, I don't think he's easy to work with, Park Chan-wook, because he just keeps making you do the shot, and they were so tight on their budget as well, and they went days and days over. But he won't stop until he knows he's got the perfect shot.
Yeah. Arup was actually telling me a story about the corridor scene as well. That I think they made Park made them take 17 takes or 17 or 18 takes for that particular shot, until the time they were exhausted and that expression was coming through on their faces that they can't go on anymore. So that's that's what it is with him.
There's you might have seen it, the OldBoy documentary Old Days, which is one of the best documentaries I've seen on a film, because the access is incredible. They talk, it's 10 years after OldBoy, but they talk to the entire cast and crew, and they've got all of the behind the scenes footage, and you see the behind the scenes footage of the corridor scene, and he is he's as tired as the character would have been, and he's got this black shirt on, and it's completely like a second skin on him because of the sweat. He wanted to make him as tired as that character would be before they would get it right, and certainly achieved that.
For me, if I have to choose one scene, of course, I think Trevor talked about JSA, and also Arnav also talked about JSA. Trevor made a very interesting point about the humanitarian aspect of JSA, and also he touched upon this physicality between the soldiers, right? When they are together, and there's different games they play, like spitting on each other. Just imagine the absurdity of the scene. The two soldiers on the DMZ zone are standing opposite to each other, and they are playing a spitting game. One person is spitting, the other person is spitting farther, and then finally other person is spitting on the face, and they're smiling. Like, the absurdity of that DMZ scene, and two friends against each other, and probably one of the most hostile places of the entire world, and these boys, these soldiers who are behaving like boys and spitting at each other. That is so incredible for me. So it's just so refreshing actually to see that. I really enjoyed watching that. I think we are towards the end of this discussion. Before we thank you, Trevor, we would like to know a little bit about the short films of Park Chan-wook. We do not have access to it. We haven't watched a lot of it. So if you could tell us a little bit, us and our audience, all 20 of them, about the short films of him, and what do you reckon about them?
So yeah, he's short films. He's done 6 short films, and some of them are sort of out there. One of the earlier ones that he did back in 1999 is called Judgment, which I think you can find relatively easily, which is one of those examples of seeing a filmmaker before they've gone on to make, Joint Security Area the following year. You start to see those little flickers of what made him great, like the bizarreness of the story and how obscure the characters are and the way it leads. I really, really, really like that film. One of the best shorts he's done. But the one that I like in particular is one called Cut from 2004. And that was part of the horror anthology called Thru, and which I think happened twice. They did 2 lots of it, using various directors from across Asia. And Park Chan-wook's one is particularly brilliant. It's what you would expect. It's violent, it's obscure, it's about a home invasion hostage situation. And there's one scene in particular where a director's wife is sort of has various sort of strings coming off her. She's sort of tied to this piano, and intermittently she's having one of her fingers chopped off with this axe. And I think that it's quite a personal film for him. There's something he made this comment once where he said that he lies in bed and thinks about what's the worst thing that could happen to him, and then he goes to sleep knowing it's not going to happen, but then he makes a film about that. This, I think, is quite a personal film because the main character in it is a director, and the home invader is a snubbed actor, basically, on one of his films, who's taken his wife hostage and is now sort of torturing his wife. So I get the feeling we get a real insight into one of his main fears of being this high-profile director, that he'll upset someone one day and they'll come and start fingers. But it's a really, really great film and sort of combines everything that's good about Park in one place.
Trevor, I would like to know from you, like it's not related to Park's movies, what is your exposure towards Indian cinema? Like, have you watched Indian movies or any particular movies you have seen?
No, I haven't. I did when I did media studies when I was at college when I was 16. Bollywood was one of the topics that we did, but I've not really revisited it since.
Okay.
And to be honest, since I launched the site a year ago, I've barely had time to watch American films, to be fair. So I haven't watched a great deal of Indian cinema, actually.
We will end this sequence by each one of us recommending you one Indian cinema to watch. Okay, you can choose any language. Arnav, Arup, your game. So any language which you want, you have to recommend one film to Trevor, and we hope he would watch it the next time we talk to him.
Okay, I'm gonna write it down.
All right, let's start with Arup. Yes, go.
My pick for you is, because you have been watching so many Korean cinema, I would pick Badlapur, which kind of translates into vengeance, place of vengeance, something like that. It's a very unique film. It kind of stars one of the most celebrated actors, Nawazuddin Siddiqui, in India today. If you get a chance, watch it. It has that kind of subtext element that we get from the Vengeance trilogy. So it's a very favorite film of mine. So if you get a chance, watch it, please.
Arnav, what about you? Recommend one Indian film to Trevor.
Yeah, like when we're talking about vengeance, I have one film in mind, but okay, I'll actually say 2. One is Ugly as in it's an English word, that ugly only. It's directed by Anurag Kashyap, who is also a celebrated Indian director all over the globe, actually. So this I'm recommending because of one of the similar reason which Arup said. It's somewhat tuned to the Vengeance series, and I would say sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, not directly, but you will understand when you watch the movie why I said so. And the other movie is Udan. It's UDAAN. I think that was that got nominated in Cannes, right? Arup, first.
I think not the
uncertain. No, uncertain. Yeah, uncertain regards. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Trevor, I would recommend you a Malayalam movie Angamali Diaries. Okay, it's very different from what you have seen. It's based on food, so it's something where food plays a very important role in of course in India and of course in Indian movies. And Angamali Diary captures this very beautifully. Angamali Diaries is by Lijo Joseph Pellicer. His film Jallikattu was recently sent by India to the Oscars. So I think it didn't end up. It got out of the race, but Angamali Diaries is of course something which I think you might enjoy. So
Okay.
these are
Okay.
our recommendations.
By the way, interestingly, India tried to remake OldBoy. The movie was not great, but yeah, there was a remake. The movie name was Zinda.
Yeah, I mean the US remake, was a
Yeah.
shambles itself, really, from one of the best directors that the US has ever produced.
Yeah.
He couldn't get it right.
Interestingly, I've watched both. I mean, in the Indian context, the Hindi movie was still better than the Hollywood one. If we compare like two not so good films, like in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are done. I think Trevor, I would like to thank you from the entire Pencopat team for spending some time with us and giving us insights about Korean cinema and Park Chan-wook films. We are really thankful for your time. Thank you so much.
Hope you also enjoyed the discussion, Trevor.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much. Anytime you want me to come back, I'll be more than happy.